Introspection. This is a topic I've touched on many times in many different ways, but I've never actually talked about it as such, or I've never used the term introspection as a video title or as a guide. I got the idea from a comment someone left saying that for some time they actually didn't really get what introspection was, and that it may be, and once they did, it was really a big deal for them. It was a big, maybe not an identity shift yet, but a shift in perception, a shift in perspective about how this awakening process unfolds, how you investigate your true nature, how inquiry works, and so forth. So they made the suggestion that I could talk about introspection as such. And so I thought that's a great idea. You know, as I reflect on it, introspection really comes online, I think, when you have that first taste of something beyond the ordinary. And I don't mean the ordinary way of thinking, and I don't mean a cognitive paradigm shift. I mean indirect experience. So that can happen through various means. It can happen through reading a book that is poignant or good at pointing to non-duality, something like The Power of Now. I know that causes a lot of these first moments of introspection, true introspection, which we could call recognition. I'm sure it's happened many times with people reading my book as well, and in the videos I make. It can happen when you have some major disruption in life and you start asking, or you just initially ask the right question with the right orientation, and sometimes with a little bit of desperation. All of a sudden something opens. You feel something deeper, and that deeper dimension is a kind of inward dimension, usually experienced as an inward dimension. Sometimes it's more of an experience of a kind of universal love or interconnection, but often it's something that feels inward. It feels like, and even if you do have that experience of unbound love and sort of boundlessness and unity or something like that, usually if you pay attention, that follows a journey inward. It follows some kind of opening that takes you deeper into yourself, into the nature of being itself, into the nature of presence itself. So really, in early stages of realization, this is what I'm always talking about. I'm always pointing to this in one way or another. I'm trying to remind people that this is possible. And the reason I say remind is I think that when we're children, especially young children, we probably spend a lot of time looking inward in a sense, but we don't think of it as such. We haven't solidified a thinking or thought-based identity yet, or self yet, or internal world that's very solid. So as we're pouring our attention into let's say consciousness and just experiencing that purity of consciousness, that oceanic nature, we're not thinking about it as such. And then as we develop an adult identity, we do sort of forget that. This is one of the things I hear frequently with people who have had awakening recently. They'll say, I remember this. I know this from childhood. But not as a cognitive memory. It's like a feeling, but it's more than a feeling. It's more real than real, right? So people often remember that experience of sort of unity consciousness, unbound being, and it is a very introspective movement. And that's what I'm, again, pointing to all the time. I'm just trying to remind people or give people examples of how it felt for me, interview people who talk about it clearly, who have gone through awakening. So I just try to put a lot of different materials out there so that you can get that first recognition. Now on this channel, many people who watch this have not only had a first recognition, they've had awakening, and many have had deeper realization, non-dual, and even no self-realization. So I'm talking to a mixed audience all the time, and yet there's something so beautiful, simple, and innocent about that first recognition. We can all relate to it no matter where someone is along that awakening path, or even if the path itself has completely disappeared and along with the illusion of the self has disappeared. There's still this preciousness and sweetness about that recognition, the possibility of it, that reconnecting with your Buddha nature from the point of view of a relative, apparent separate being. It's magical. It's auspicious. It's truly grace. It's the beginning of the hero's journey in alignment with awakening. So introspection is what it's all about. One of the most potent ways to approach that with people that I find is to start with a kind of mindfulness, but go much deeper. That is, pay attention to thoughts, right? Notice thoughts. That's sometimes revolutionary for people. Some people are so identified with thoughts they don't even realize that they are essentially thinking all the time. So to become aware of thoughts, which is sort of basic mindfulness, is important. Once you become aware of thoughts, then it becomes more about, and by the way, you can become aware of thoughts and not have a deep sense of what introspection is yet in the way I'm talking about it. So that's just the first step, is to become aware of thoughts and then practice being aware of thoughts, which will start to align you with presence. The next part, though, is to actually get curious about what's really going on, curious about why you suffer, curious about how it feels that we can be distanced from life, even though some instinct tells us we're not separate from anything. Curiosity about how this internal mental world of me, mine, having and losing, gaining and losing, coming and going, constantly trying to avoid discomfort and trying to seek pleasure, and finding that actually leads to a lot of problems. It leads to a lot of bad habits and addictions and so forth. Noticing all of that and becoming genuinely curious about what's behind it, right? What's actually going on here? And once you've started to notice thoughts as thoughts, you have access to the answer to that, or those questions. And the answer is beyond thought. It's below thought. It's beneath thought. It is primary to thought. And this is why I talk so much about consciousness and thought and mind identification, because that's what it's all about ultimately. So when you add curiosity to this awareness of thought, and curiosity as to, well, what is it that's taking itself to be something that those thoughts are referencing, right? I thoughts all day long. But why does it feel so real to you? Why does it feel so real that those thoughts are about someone? Well, why don't you go look for the someone? That's when we start to introspect. And we realize that it's not a mental activity to introspect in this way. It's I want to say visceral, but it's not necessarily visceral in the body. It's instinctual. It's instinctual, and it opens up, and it's deep. It has a lot of depth to it, far more depth than the intellectual world that we find ourselves kind of imprisoned within. It has a lot of depth, and it is accessible through thought, or through the apparatus of thought, which is, let's say, mind, or the cognitive apparatus. But the first step, again, is to disidentify from thought and then start to become curious about what is it that does the thinking? What is it that feels like the thinker? Where is it? Where am I? Who am I, right? Then we get to these fundamental questions. What is mu? There are a lot of ways to approach this. So that's the sort of stepwise path into this experience of introspection. And then the experience can become a rather pure experience at some point, where you don't need to ask an intellectual or intellectually structured question anymore. You just know how to orient to that opening into something greater than thought, something beyond thought, something beyond the boundaries of the cognitive apparatus that's always trying to divide up reality, even though it can't be done. It seems to try to do it all day long, right? That's what thoughts seem to do. I'm me, you're you, I'm this, but I'm not that. There's no past or future in the present. Anything I believe about myself, there's a lot of other assumptions made in that moment of what I'm not. Like all this dividing thought, right? Become curious about what it is that's undivided. Or how does that thought even arise? Look and see. So it is an inward attention. It's an attention inward, but not on thought specifically. It's not questioning yourself cognitively. Well, what are my values? What do I believe? Or who am I? Well, I'm this and I'm that. Maybe I can make myself more like this. What can I do to improve my life? What can I do to feel better? That's not introspection in the way I'm talking about it. That's just analysis. And you're not actually introspecting. Your attention is fixed on thoughts. So how do you unfix your attention from thought? It's a little different for everyone, but I make suggestions all the time about this. If you're curious to figure that out, I would, or look at this mechanism I'm talking about that's sort of preventing us from truly introspecting. I would suggest a couple playlists. One is the playlist called Mind Identification, which is also one of my very small number of favorite playlists. It's just a fun topic. The other one is Thoughts, and then the other one is Consciousness. Look into these playlists and kind of start to develop your own way of introspection, or of asking the question you really want to ask, or looking inward, or looking beyond thought, or questioning, what is the sense of being right now that is not bound by thought, that doesn't really care whether there's a thought that says, I'm this or I'm that, I'm awake or I'm asleep, I'm clear or I'm not clear right now. These are thoughts. What is it that just doesn't care about those thoughts? It's just not moved by them. It's not tainted by them. It's not modified in any way by any cognitive thought process. What is that? And you don't need to know what it is with an answer either. Just reclaim it. Introspection is all about reclamation of what has never gone anywhere. It's always here. This capacity that I don't want to give a name. It's always here. If you're awake, it's here. Notice that. Notice the totality of experience that is unperturbed by thoughts, movement of mind, struggle, doubt, belief. It's unperturbed by any of that. The doubt can be there. The belief can be there. The planning can be there. All the thoughts can be there. This isn't changed. What is it? What is it in your experience right now? Look.